3 days. No food, no water, rats on the floor in total darkness, and one woman 46 years old who refused to leave. A sheriff outside with a court order, deputies at every exit, phone lines cut. She pressed her fingers in her ears and stayed. Her name was Adina De Zavala, 5'3", a schoolteacher, and she was trying to save the Alamo from being torn apart. You have never heard of her, because history gave the credit to someone else entirely. This is the story they never told. To understand why she did this, you need to understand what the Alamo means to Texas. It is not just a building. It is sacred. February 1836. Texas was fighting for its independence from Mexico. 189 men held a mission called the Alamo. For 13 days, they held off Santa Anna and thousands of soldiers. Davy Crockett was there, Jim Bowie, William Travis. On March 6th, the Mexican army broke through. Every single defender lost their life that morning. Not one of them surrendered. 6 weeks later, Texas won independence at San Jacinto. The rallying cry that carried them forward was, "Remember the Alamo." Texas never forgot. But here is what most people do not know. The bloodiest fighting that day did not happen inside the chapel. It happened in a stone building called the Long Barrack. That is where the defenders made their final stand against the army. That same building is where Adina De Zavala would make her own stand. 70 years later, for very different but equal stakes. After the battle, most of the Alamo was left in ruins. The army destroyed parts of it on retreat. Neglect finished the rest. By 1877, the Long Barrack was sold to a merchant. He turned the ground where heroes perished into a grocery. A cheap wooden facade covered the original stone walls. Most people walking past had no idea the real historic walls were inside. The state bought the chapel in 1883, but the Long Barrack still belonged to a wholesale company called Hugo. In 1903, a hotel developer offered to buy the Long Barrack. He planned to tear everything down and start fresh. The ground where Texas heroes made their last stand was about to become a hotel. A piece of sacred history was nearly erased. That is when two women entered the story. What happened between them became almost as dramatic as the Battle of 1836 itself. If you look up who saved the Alamo, one name appears every time: Clara Driscoll, the woman history calls Savior of the Alamo. She was 22, wealthy. Her family owned one of the biggest ranches in South Texas. She had just returned home from Europe. In 1904, she wrote a personal check for $65,000. She bought the Long Barrack outright herself. That is over $2 million today. The newspapers loved it. A young Texas heiress saving the Alamo with her own fortune. When Clara passed in 1945, her remains lay in state inside the Alamo Chapel. Texas gave her a hero's farewell. But here is what they never mention. Clara did not discover the Alamo needed saving. She did not even know it was in danger. Someone else did that work, someone who gave up far more than money and whose name was almost completely erased from history. Her name was Adina Emilia De Zavala, born in 1861, Harris County, Texas, a teacher with a very famous last name. Her mother was Irish, her father was Taino, and her grandfather was Lorenzo De Zavala, one of the founders of the Republic. Lorenzo De Zavala was the first vice president of the Republic of Texas. He helped write the Constitution that built the nation. When Santa Anna became dictator, Lorenzo defected to Texas. He risked everything: his wealth, his title for Texas freedom. Lorenzo passed away months after independence, but his legacy carried on through his granddaughter, Adina. She never forgot him. She called herself a student and jealous lover of Texas history. Everyone who knew her said that was no exaggeration at all. 5'3", blue eyes, brown hair, never married. She gave her entire life to saving the places Texas was forgetting. In 1887, she moved to San Antonio. When she saw what the Alamo had become, she knew something had to change. The ground where her grandfather's fellow soldiers had given their lives was now a warehouse, full of groceries and dry goods. She researched the building for years, studied old maps, talked to historians, and then she discovered something remarkable. Behind the ugly wooden storefront, the original limestone walls from 1724 were still standing, fully intact. It was not just a warehouse. It was the oldest structure in San Antonio. The real Alamo had been hiding in plain sight all along. She founded the De Zavala chapter of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, one of the first preservation groups in the state. In 1892, she got the owner to promise her group first option to buy, a gentleman's agreement, nothing on paper. 11 years later, the owner got a cash offer from a hotel developer. Adina's group had almost no money. They needed help fast. That is when she met Clara Driscoll at the Menger Hotel in San Antonio. Clara was young, passionate about Texas, and very rich. Adina showed her the evidence, the original walls, the research, the real history. Clara was convinced and agreed to help fund it. In 1904, Clara wrote the check, $65,000. The hotel developer backed off. The building was saved. The Texas legislature paid Clara back in 1905 and gave custody of the Alamo to the Daughters of the Republic of Texas. Newspapers gave Clara all the credit. They called her the savior of the Alamo. Adina was mentioned sometimes, usually in passing. At this point, the two women were still allies. They shared the same cause. They were partners in the fight to preserve history. That partnership was about to shatter. Saving the Alamo was one thing. Deciding what to do with it was a completely different war. Clara had seen the grand monuments of Europe, Paris, Rome. She wanted the Alamo Chapel to stand alone in an elegant open park. Her vision was simple. Tear down the long barrack, remove the ugly remains of the grocery store, let the chapel shine on its own. To Clara, the long barrack was an eyesore, an ugly leftover from its years as a store. She was convinced it all had to come down. Adina was horrified. She had spent 15 years proving that the long barrack was the most sacred ground in the entire compound. She wrote that the bloodiest spot was the long barrack, where the enemy fell in heaps. The chapel was not the Alamo, she argued. The chapel was just a small part of the mission, she insisted, not where the heroes fought. Tearing down the barrack was a crime. The Daughters of the Republic split into two factions. Clara had the money and connections. Adina had the truth on her side. They sued each other in court. The sheriff enforcing the rulings had a mother who led Clara's own faction, a conflict of interest. February 10th, 1908. The lease on the long barrack expired that day. Clara's faction moved to take control at once. But Adina got there first. She brought new padlocks, changed every lock on every door, and waited inside for whatever came next. By evening, Sheriff John Tobin arrived with deputies and lawyers. He carried a court order demanding that Adina leave immediately. Deputies grabbed Adina's guards and dragged them out by force. Then they turned toward the building where Adina was still inside. She ran up the stairs into a room on the second floor. She locked the door behind her and told them she was not coming out. The sheriff read the court order through the door. Adina pressed her fingers into her ears. She refused to hear a single word. So he cut the electricity, then the telephone lines. He posted a guard with one order: nobody brings food inside this building. The first night was the hardest. Alone in total darkness, no bed, no blanket, no chair, just cold stone floors and nothing else. And the rats. One paper wrote that she feared rodents more than all the representatives of the law combined. She stayed anyway. By morning, reporters arrived from across the country. A woman was holding the Alamo alone. The story was impossible to ignore. The New York Times ran it, so did the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times. Adina De Zavala was suddenly a national headline. She spoke through cracks in the walls. Through a 5-inch opening, her lips cracked from thirst, but her voice never wavered. She told a reporter, "Here I will remain until justice is done in our cause. I will stay here forever if that is what it takes." Her friends risked arrest to keep her alive. They lowered food on ropes, poured coffee through narrow rubber tubes into the walls. The sheriff's own mother was president of Clara's faction, the very people trying to force Adina out of the building she defended. By day 3, public opinion had shifted to Adina's side. One newspaper compared her stand to William Travis at the Alamo in 1836. A composer wrote a song calling her a daughter of the Alamo, who stands guard within its walls. Her photo was on the sheet music. The governor of Texas sent a representative to San Antonio. He promised Adina the state would take control until courts decided. After 3 days inside, Adina walked out, weak, exhausted, lips cracked and dry, but she had won. The long barrack still stood. She saved the long barrack from destruction. Historians would later confirm she had been right about nearly every single claim. The original limestone walls from 1724 were still behind the facade, exactly as Adina argued for over a decade. But the courts ruled against her in 1909. The judge sided with Clara Driscoll's faction on the future of the building. Adina and her chapter were expelled from the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, cast out of the group she herself had founded. In 1913, while the governor was away, the lieutenant governor authorized demolition of the barrack's upper floor. The rooms where Adina slept on cold stone with rats for 3 nights were torn down, gone forever, but the first floor survived. Those original mission walls still stand today. They survived because one woman refused to leave a dark room for 3 nights. So why is Clara the savior of the Alamo, while Adina is barely a footnote? The answer is complicated, but it is painfully obvious. Clara wrote the check. $65,000 makes a better headline than 15 years of quiet research and organizing. Clara had political power. She became Democratic National Committee woman for Texas. She moved in circles Adina never could reach. And her vision won. The upper floor came down, the park was built, the chapel stood alone. Clara's version of the Alamo prevailed. But there is another reason historians have only recently begun to discuss. It is uncomfortable, but it needs to be said out loud. Adina was Tejana, Mexican-American, in early 1900s Texas that shaped how people viewed her and told her story to all. Clara was white and wealthy, from an Anglo-ranching family. In the Texas story of heroism, she fit the role that people expected. The irony is deep. Adina's own grandfather helped found the Republic of Texas. She had deeper roots in this land than most anyone. But history chose Clara. It chose a check over sacrifice, wealth over courage. For a century, almost nobody even questioned that. Today, the Alamo is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the only one in Texas. Over 1.5 million people visit it every year. The long barrack Adina fought for is now a museum, open to the public, exactly what she envisioned more than 100 years ago. Adina never stopped. She placed markers at 38 historic sites across Texas. She saved the Spanish governor's palace too. She passed away in 1955 at 93 years old. Her funeral procession drove past the Alamo one final time. In 1994, Texas placed a marker for her at Alamo Plaza. It had sat forgotten in a courthouse basement for months. The Handbook of Texas now states it plain. Time proved Adina De Zavala was correct in most of her historical claims on the Alamo. Clara Driscoll wrote a check. Adina De Zavala spent 3 days with rats in the dark. Which one sounds like a real savior to you? Some heroes get statues, some get erased, but history corrects itself eventually, even if it takes more than 100 years. Now you know her name. Adina Emilia De Zavala, the woman who truly saved the Alamo. Remember her. Texas almost forgot a century.